summer, when my sister and I were young, my dad would set up a tent in the backyard. I have fond memories of afternoons spent playing in our super secret clubhouse. To enter, visitors have to either recite the password or pay a reasonable entrance fee, 1 cookie per club member. The tent was ours, and ours alone, and we could leave it in as big of a mess as we wanted to without getting scolded. Comics, toys, blankets, and even clothes were scattered about on the floor, but neither of us minded the chaos. On rare occasions, Dad would let us spend the night alone in the tent. Those nights were particularly special to us, as they were the only times we got to do anything outdoorsy. We lived in the city, and the closest we got to nature was a small forest separating our yard from the neighbor's home. The trees were so thin and far apart from one another that we could clearly see through to the other side. It barely qualified as a forest, but despite this, I learned one night that something could hide in it, just out of sight. That night was the last I ever spent in the tent. It happened when I was about 9 years old. I woke one morning to the sound of my dad shutting the attic door. The noise could only mean one of two things. Either he was feeling nostalgic and wanted to look at our old family albums, or it was time for the tent to come up. I ran out into the hall, only to see him holding the lumpy bag that contained our childhood fort. My dad smiled as I squealed and bounced with excitement. While my sister and I ate breakfast, he slaved away in the backyard, pitching the old patchy tent under the freshly cut grass. From time to time, we'd hear him gasp, but whenever we looked out the window, he'd just smile and wave. He wanted to make us happy, so he hid his frustrations as best he could. In hindsight, he probably would have spared himself a lot of grief if he'd taken the time to find the assembly instructions. But he always managed to figure it out on his own eventually. We knew we were in for a special treat when my father momentarily disappeared in the garage, only to return with an extension cord and the small TV that used to belong on our kitchen counter. It had broken a few months back, but evidently Dad had found a way to repair it. He ran the extension cord from the socket near the sliding glass patio door all the way into the tent, where he then plugged in the TV. Upon his return, he declared that my sister and I were going to have a special movie night as a reward for our excellent report cards. We were elated. That night, Dad brought us popcorn, candy, and a thermos full of hot chocolate. He kissed us goodnight and left us to our marathon of Disney VHS tapes. We fell asleep to the sound of crickets chirping outside and anthropomorphic I would have thought someone had swallowed all the ambient noise. Just as I started to unzip my sleeping bag, the motion-censored porch lights suddenly came to life, casting both bright rays and an odd shadow on the wall of the tent. "Dad," I asked weakly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. I heard an unnatural shriek in response, not unlike the call of an eagle, though the sound was lower and more drawn out. I examined the shadow. Its proportions were stretched and exaggerated, as though someone had made a semblance of a human out of pipe cleaners. As the distorted shape drew nearer, I fearfully reached a hand towards my sister, shaking her sleeping bag. She was tucked in all the way, with only her dark, matted hair sticking out from the top. She'd always been a heavy sleeper, so when she failed to awaken, I wasn't entirely surprised. Thumping sounds resonated on the porch as the figure moved. It began to circle around the tent. As terrifying as its shadow was, it was more terrifying to lose it from view every time it reached the back of the tent. Little by little, the stalker walked circles around the tent, drawing ever nearer with each rotation, until it was ridden within arm's reach. Its fingertips, or what I assume were fingertips, crept along the fabric, producing a noise like paper being torn. Fortunately, it didn't seem capable of piercing the protective mesh. Suddenly, the TV jerked violently towards the tent's entrance. The thing was pulling on the extension cord. The zipper began to unravel as the power cord lifted against it. I dove towards the TV as swiftly as I could and unplugged it. There was so much tension on the cord that my actions caused the form to fall back with an angered shriek. This time I heard my sister stirring in her bed. I barely had time to process what happened when I saw something slide into the tent from the small opening it had just made. Its texture was unlike anything I had ever seen, or have ever seen since then. I'd say it was similar to a lizard's scales, only more porous. With a frightened yelp, I smashed the TV against the finger, causing it to retract. Quickly I pulled the zipper back down to the ground, only to feel the creature pulling it in the opposite direction. It wanted to get in, but I wasn't going to let it. I may have been just a child, but I was stronger than I looked. In the midst of a temper tantrum, my father had once tried to lock me in my room. Despite the fact that a grown man was holding the door shut, I still managed to crack it open a few times by sheer force of uncontrolled will. Now I was doing the same, but with a flimsy zipper instead. A snap resounded in the backyard, and once again the creature fell and bellowed. I could only deduce that the slider on its end had broken. Its ear-piercing howls made me quiver. I felt paralyzed, but I kept my hands firmly in place. My sister, on the other hand, merely turned over in her sleeping bag. As I sat there in abject horror, I heard the creature's footsteps head towards the woods, where they grew more distant. Even when the motion sensor lights finally turned off 10 minutes sitting at the kitchen table, happily swinging her legs while she scooped up her favourite chocolate-flavoured cereal. The sound of the zipper slowly opening behind me brought a wave of numbing fear to my chest. My head turned slowly towards the tent, just in time to catch a glimpse of something running into the woods away from my house. Something with black matted hair and strange proportions. It was gone in a flash, but from what I could see of it, I could tell it was smaller than what had been outside my tent earlier. My sister had woken up long before me that night. The click of the VHS tape coming to an end had woken her up, and she'd gone to sleep inside, where it was warmer. That was very, very creepy. Very, very, very creepy. God. Even in your backyard, you're not safe while camping. I thought at first it was gonna be some psycho just in their backyard. Okay, this next one is by Enigmia. And it's titled While Camping in Australia. Camping always has the potential to be kind of creepy. I love it, being alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a tent between me and the elements. I find it incredibly refreshing to get away from the rest of humanity like that. Yet, I would be the first to admit that being so isolated, it is easy to go from calm and relaxed to panicked and expecting death, with nothing more than the sound of a twig snapping unexpectedly. But it is worth it, and I take all the safety measures and precautions that I can. My family knows my travel plans, up-to-date maps. I check in via satellite phone regularly. A recently serviced vehicle, spare wheels, spare fuel, spare water, and all the rest. Plus I have enough medical supplies to start a small hospital. I also do a lot of research, so I know the area, mostly the weather, the politics, and the local flora and fauna. I was travelling to snake and spider infested Australia, so that last one was of particularly high priority for the trip. I make a bit of money as a freelance nature photographer, so I was hoping the spring season would get me some good shots of wildlife. But despite feeling pretty organised, despite never having any major problems while camping in the past, there is one more thing I will never neglect looking into again. Local folklore. Right, yeah, laugh if you want, but let me tell you about my time camping in the Australian outback. It had been a rough day of driving. I felt like every one of my joints were compressed from the Land Rover bouncing over the rough, corrugated tracks, and the weather had been particularly hot and dry, even more than usual. 4 days into my 2-week trek across the desert, and I was sunburned, blistered, and covered in little bites from gnats and mosquitoes, which no amounts of sunscreen or insect repellent seemed to protect against, respectively. I considered it all worth it, though. The landscape is spectacular, like nothing I had ever seen before. When I stopped for lunch, there were panoramic views of red earth land, so flat you could see for miles. Make out one distant peak. You could see for miles, uninterrupted, but for low growing grasses and the occasional silvery paper bark tree. I could make out one distant peak. It definitely So I set up my tent on the flat. Sorry, I'm knocking a wire about there. So I set up my tent on the flat, hard soil before gathering my gear to climb the hill. It was relatively easy to scramble up. I had changed into trousers before leaving despite the heat because the temperature always dropped so suddenly in the desert. I was grateful for this later as my knees were somewhat protected as I hauled myself over rocks and through thorny bushes. My hand was stained the same bright red of the soil by the time I neared the top, and I suspected the rest of me was too. I could even feel the grit permeating my mouth. There was no regular reception, but I wasn't worried. I still had the satellite phone if I needed it. The top made for a great vantage point for pictures, but the sun was still a little while off. That beautiful dusky lighting, so I had a look around. The hill was mostly barren. barren rock, but small, determined shrubs found room to grow, albeit withered and stunted in the slightest cracks. On the far side I discovered a small hollow of a cave. It was narrow at the mouth, but rapidly got more wide further in. I yelled and stomped in an attempt to ascertain if there was any wildlife lurking, but there was no sound in response. Crouching down, I shuffled in. It smelled sour and like rotting meat. My boots knocked against something solid, which clattered away like dropped cutlery. Clicking on my torch, I saw it was a pile of bones, ranging vastly in size. They looked recent and were not entirely devoid of flesh. Disgusted, I covered my mouth and nose with my hand and quickly swung the light around to assure myself I was alone. Native wild dogs, I suspected. Dingoes, nocturnal and already out hunting for the night. There were wild bones scattered throughout the cave, sometimes at random, sometimes in little piles, as well as partially eaten animal carcasses. Small mammals mostly, and the better part of a big room. Slight depressions and hollows in the dust indicated where the animals must lay. I didn't linger, knowing my scent would already cause the dingoes some consternation when they returned. Although like any wild dogs, I knew dingoes could be vicious. I wasn't worried camping so close. They looked very well fed and weren't the type of animal to pick fights with humans unprompted. Outside, I got a couple of shots of a wedge-tailed eagle before it flew quickly east, and eventually shots of the sun setting over the desert plains. I had expected to see more wildlife. This was the least populated part of the desert so far. Apart from the carcasses in the cave, I hadn't seen any mobs of kangaroos, nor a common busted bird all day. Not good for photography. It seemed that here, even the flies and ants weren't pestering me. It was peaceful, lying back on a rock, watching the stars emerge one by one, and knowing I was the only human for hundreds of miles. Desolate, nearly uninhabitable expanses of wilderness in every direction make you feel like you are on another planet. It can make me uneasy at times, but mostly it feels liberating to be so isolated, and I was happy. Eventually, I had to climb down before I lost all visibility. Night had fallen like a blanket, painting the luminous landscape in shades of grey and navy. I had left an electric lantern on my table at camp, so with no obstructions on the plane, it was easy to get back to the car in the dark. didn't really want to aggravate them. Besides, I couldn't see any sign of movement in the campsite. This was confirmed when I arrived. Apart from the lantern, nothing was disturbed. But the lantern, it looked like it had been crushed underfoot, but it would have taken a massive amount of weight to achieve that. A second later, I nearly jumped out of my skin when, in the distance, the most bone-chilling sound I have ever heard reverberated through the night. High-pitched, unadulterated cries, rising and falling in a mass chorus. I was already jittery, so it took me a second to realize it must be dingoes howling. But they sounded so distant when surely they had been in my campsite only moments before. Nothing can move that fast. The cold, still night air carried calls from what sounded like miles away. Hair stood up on the back of my neck, and the long howls only added to my growing anxiety. I did several things then. I made sure I had my car keys in my pocket, and I dragged my sleeping bag out of the tent and made room for it on the back seat to sleep there. At least the car would block out the sound of the dogs better than a tent. Then I climbed onto the roof of the car and adjusted the spotlight I had attached. It was good for providing emergency light, and I often used it to look for any animal eyes at night near my camp. Usually I enjoyed this interaction with nature, but that night I was already nervous. With some trepidation I moved the beam of light around the clearing, straining my eyes for any glint of reflection that would indicate the presence of another creature. I thought there was nothing, but the very top of the light caught something. So briefly, I wondered if I had imagined it. I swung the beam higher and higher, beyond the height of a dingo, far beyond even the height of a human, and I saw it again. Two milky white, perfectly round dots in the dark. I was frozen stiff with shock until they tilted suddenly. I jumped, the spotlight jerking to one side with me where I saw more of the eyes. These ones close enough that I could make out shadowed, impossibly lanky humanoid frames with elongated limbs. With the light on them, they do jerk their heads as though to look at me, eyes glinting white and luminescent like pearls. I turned the light off, and instantly it was stupid, but all I could think was that I didn't want to see them anymore. The darkness embraced me even more thoroughly now that my eyes had grown accustomed to such bright light. I blinked, desperately trying to discern any movement nearby, while simultaneously dreading seeing anything at all. In the distance, the howls cut off abruptly. Now my own ragged breathing was the only sound. Strange, when usually the night seer hosted choirs of insects chirping. With a sudden rush of adrenaline and an instinct warning me to move, I pitched myself from the roof of a car. I didn't climb. I threw myself off, hit the ground hard on one shoulder, staggered upright, and started fumbling for my keys. I heard a rumbling sound, deep and building like an avalanche, and realized the ground was shaking. Wrenching open the door I heard ripping nearby. I didn't have to turn around to know it was my tent being shredded. With my lungs straining, heart pounding, fast, however. An immense scraping sound came from the back of the Land Rover, then the twisting shriek of metal being mutilated. I yanked at the gearbox, fumbling to get the car into drive while simultaneously looking in the rear view mirror. I couldn't see anything past the luggage I had piled up to the roof in the boot, but the scraping at the back of the vehicle continued, like something was trying to claw its way inside. When I heard the sound of glass smashing, I finally slammed my foot on the accelerator and began to hurtle back in the direction I had come that day. It wasn't long before I nearly rolled the car as the right-hand side dipped into a dry creek bed at high speed. I swerved, by some luck managing to regain control and slowed my pace considerably. Never had I had to exert more self-control. Every instinct was telling me to keep moving as fast as possible, but my rational side knew getting out in one piece was more important. Every time I glanced into the side mirrors, I expected to see something in pursuit. I drove through the night, hands gripping the wheel like vices, jumping at the silhouette of every tree. As the light of dawn broke and my breath puffed up in clouds in the morning chill, I saw what I had been looking for. A fence indicating a nearby cattle station I had stopped at to refill my water the previous morning. I drove up to the property. The owner was bundled up in a woolen jumper, leaning back on the veranda steps, hot coffee in hand. He watched me approach, but leapt up to help me when I all but fell out of the car. Once he had ascertained that I wasn't actually injured, he sat me down at his kitchen table, spooned instant coffee into a second mug and reboiled the kettle without any further questions. Eventually I spoke. Something strange happened to me last night. Yeah, I was taken aback by his response. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an assumption. It was just casual acceptance. You strayed west. Maybe. I don't know. The track wasn't distinct. Nah, you did for sure. Quincan territory. Excuse me, what territory? I had already encountered my fair share of Australian sarcasm in my trip, so I wasn't 100% certain I wasn't being teased. My people don't go there, haven't for thousands of years. Quincan spirits do much mischief, he shrugged. I saw these things like humans, but tall, thin. He was nodding, unperturbed. I still felt so shaken, the echoes of the metal ripping ringing in my ears. He passed me a coffee and left the room. A little while later, when my coffee was almost gone, he came back with a photo of some cave paintings. Something like that, you're right, I told him. I couldn't believe I was actually having this conversation. Speaking of caves, I found a dingo cave too, on a hill, full of dead animals. Animals, bones, yeah. No, bits of rue and the likes. Dingoes wouldn't leave me on a carcass. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, unsure of how to reply. Thanks for the coffee. I should probably check the damage to the car and get going. Damage? Yeah, I reckon one of those krakens or whatever had to go at my tent down in the Rover. Something scared me half to death anyhow. Quincan, he corrected automatically, then went silent. He watched me carefully for a minute before picking up the empty mugs and putting them on the sink. He ran a hand through his curly dark hair and then shook his head. Doesn't sound like them. They're good spirits. I'll check out your car. We went outside and looked. The spare wheel, metal casing and all had been ripped off. Window smashed, the boot door hung slightly crookedly on its hinges, and half my luggage must have fallen out as I drove. There were broad claw marks scratched through the paint on a panel on the right-hand side that ended in deep indentations and finally punctures in the metal. I don't think it was a dingo. Do you think it was one of those things? Quinkins wouldn't do this. They are cheeky buggers, but helpers. They might have been trying to warn you. Warn me about what? I asked, after hesitating to decide whether I really wanted to know after all. Morley, I reckon. He's like him, but different. He cleared his throat. My grandfather said, when the ground shakes and animals flee, you know Morley is near. You're one lucky fella that he was more interested in the tent than you. He ran a hand deftly over the claw marks gouged in the car. It was shocking how small his fingers looked in the breadth of the gash. What is? He cut me off, putting a hand on my shoulder. Looked me dead in the eye, expression serious as a heart attack. I'd reckon he's got your scent though. You should get a move on, mate. I decided not to ask any more questions. I left immediately and kept driving back to the original way I had gone until I intersected a highway. From there I went to the nearest city, booked a plane flight and cut my trip short. The local indigenous people knew something about that hill, knowledge that saw them, and even their ancestors today giving that place a wide berth. Who better to learn the dangers of the land from than those who lived from it? Next time I camp, I will be more mindful of ancient warnings, and I would recommend you do the same. That one was really good. It was a bit longer, but that one was really, really good. Okay. This last one for tonight is by Jennifer, and it's titled Camping with my grandparents. Back in the 80s, when I was a kid, I would go camping with my grandparents. They had a huge camper with almost all of the comforts of home. They also had tents that they would let the kids sleep in if they were feeling adventurous. I liked the air conditioner too much for that, so I left the tent sleeping to my boy cousins. We went to a river campsite about 2 hours from our hometown. It was very nice, and it was a very nice and clean place, but it always gave off a creepy air, in my opinion. That was another reason why I would always sleep in the camper with my grandparents. I was a great big chicken back then, and it didn't help that my older cousins would tell me stories to try and scare me. At our regular camping spot, there was a beach area that we loved to swim in. Almost as soon as we would drive up, we would run and jump into the water. There was even a rope tied to a tree that we would get on and swing ourselves into the water. When the sun would get too hot on our heads, we would swim out several yards to a shaded area. The water was always several degrees colder there, and it was really refreshing after baking in the sun for a while. One day I was swimming in the shaded area, or rather I was doggy paddling. I was getting tired and hungry, but I didn't want to be the first kid to get out of the water. a sudden, I feel something grab my foot. I yelped out and started flailing, trying to make my way to the bank. My older cousins asked me what happened, and when I told them, they started making fun of me. They told me it was probably just a fish that swam by my foot, or maybe some underwater weeds. I was only 10, so I believed pretty much anything they told me. I felt better and ran off to the campground to get some food. The next day we were swimming again. There was an old pier that we would get a run and go and jump off of. It was very close to the shaded area, and after my cousins convinced me that what happened the day before was no big deal, I got up the nerve to jump off. I got a long run and go and dove feet first into the water. All of a sudden, I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my left foot. It was like nothing my 10-year-old self had ever felt before. I yelled out, and my cousin Tommy asks, "What now, Chicken Little?" I'm crying and trying to make my way out of the water. When I get on land, my foot starts pouring blood. My older cousin Wesley says, "Oh shit, go get Grandma." Even though I'm crying my eyes out, I tell Wesley I am going to tell our grandparents he said a curse word. No wonder they picked on me. I was a pain. My grandparents ran over and Grandpa carried me inside so they can check my foot out. It has a pretty big gash in it. Nothing but a little pressure and peroxide couldn't handle. They got it cleaned up and told me I should sit out from swimming to keep it from getting dirty. I was heartbroken. I loved to swim more than anything, and now the whole trip was ruined. Grandma and Grandpa said they would take us fishing on the boat. Now I know they did this because they didn't want me to be left behind while my cousins swam. But back then I was still complaining and sulking over my injury and talking about how everything is ruined. I do not know why they didn't all just throw me overboard. We go way out into the water, so far that our campsite looks like an ant campground. It is one of our favorite fishing spots, and sometimes it is so shallow we can even see the fish swimming around underwater. We all fish, and eventually I start to forget about my tragic life and begin to have fun. All of a sudden, the water beside the boat starts to bubble. At first we think it's probably a turtle or a large fish, but the bubbles get bigger and there is a gulping sound. There was a depth finder connected to the boat that was supposed to show where the fish are. Grandpa maneuvers it around to see if he can see anything. There was this large, dark blob showing up on screen. This was confusing because the fish always showed up as really tiny, almost like dots. We had never seen anything that big show up on there and really didn't think it was possible. Grandpa looks inside his toolbox and gets a large flashlight. He thinks maybe he can shine it into the water and see what this thing might be. He turns it on and points it into the water. You kids stand back in the middle of the boat with your grandma, just in case. He trails off. Something has caught his eye and he gets a really strange look on his face. Doris, crank the boat up and let's head back, he tells my grandma. He looks at her and makes this weird face I have never seen before. She kind of nods and cranks the boat, and quite frankly, we haul ours back to the campground. On the way in, I look at my grandpa. He is pale and his hands are shaking. This is when I become officially scared. We get back to the camp and my grandpa pulls my grandma to the side and tells her something. Then he walks off toward the campground. was way back before cell phones, so the only way we could make phone call while camping was to hope someone in the small office where you pay to park your campers had one. Over the next hour or so, I can tell my grandparents are trying their hardest to keep us kids occupied. They take us inside and we play cards and Monopoly. They even let us watch little black and white TV. This is very strange because they usually tell us to play outside while we are camping, and that we can watch TV at home. We are in the middle of an I Love Lucy rerun when I hear cars pull up. I am hoping it is my dad. He will show up as a surprise sometimes if he can manage to get a day off work. But it's not my dad. It's the sheriff. It is a sheriff car and a state patrol. There's also a white van that pulls in behind them. We get up to go see what's going on, and Grandma tells us to stay where we are. If I catch any of you outside before I say go outside, then we won't come back camping this summer. I have never heard my grandma sound like that before. Her voice is shaky, and I am on the verge of tears by this point. We do as we are told, and when my grandpa comes in, we overhear them talking about leaving. He is saying he needs to stay long enough to give a statement, but we should be packing up our things. We kids hear this and we all lose our shit. No, we are supposed to be here till Sunday. Why? We can't leave. I don't want to leave. Is chorused among the three of us. They both shush us and tell us to keep quiet, and they will explain later. They calm us down by telling us that they will find another campground. We just need to move from this one. This satisfies us for a while, and we go back to watching TV as we are told. It's during the 10th I Love Lucy rerun that the sheriff calls my grandparents outside. We try to eavesdrop, but our grandparents thought ahead and walked too far off for us to hear. But whatever it was, it looked serious, and when they walked back inside, my grandmother had been crying. All they would tell us was that someone had gotten hurt and we needed to leave and go to a safer place. Well, I found out what really happened. They actually told my older cousin after we got home, and a couple of years later he told me. The day we were in the boat, my grandpa shined the flashlight beam and saw a body. He could see a human eye and long, light-coloured hair floating around. He almost jumped in to try and save her, but as he got a better look, he realised that the body was cut into. The body had one eye, one arm, one leg, split totally down the middle. The authorities struck the lake and found the other half close to our shaded area. The place we swam every day had been there. So now two things will always haunt me. Was that a hand that grabbed my foot that day? And probably the worst thought, the sharp thing